The sky above the sprawling camp at the foot of Mount Erebon was a bruised purple, a sign of the storms to come and the snows that would follow. This far north in the Runelands, the lawless territory east of Drakal and north of Mire, a handful of weeks was all it took for high summer to turn into far winter. The smaller peaks rising around the valley were limned in gold from the sun's recent descent. The silver light of 100,000 stars and a sickle moon would have been enough for most in the camp to see by, despite the copper lamps hung in concentric rings around their tents. For most in this camp were chimere. Horns adorned their brows, and their bodies were an elegant amalgam of animal and human, and they could see even in darkness. The few who were not chimere were fae or bloodkin, their vision as sharp. The lamps were magicked to keep time and would only be doused when all the day's work was done. Seated upon a tree stump carved with snaking vines and budding wildflowers, Isa eased a narrow blade around a length of buttery no-shy wood in a slow spiral. So used to the feel of a carving knife in her hand, Isa focused her attention solely on her students' upturned faces and the significantly duller blades in their laps, until her gaze slid past them to the nearest copper lamp, throwing warm light in a spray of pinpricks, waiting for it to flare and signal the end of her day. The children of the camp took lessons well into the night after history and weaponry and magic during the day. Blessedly, this group of 8-year-olds was Isai's last lesson in charm-making for the day. Instead of the sacred no-shy, each clutched a bit of spare wood left over from the older children's lessons in their sticky palms. The no-shy trees, the tallest and most ancient of all the beings who dwelled in the north, only grew in the Anir Mountains, north of Mire's borders. It was a curious thing, how many. In millennia past, the wild fae who dwelled in these mountains offered no-shy saplings to the first queens who ruled most of Akamar, both north of the river and south of it, back when the realm was known by just one name instead of the 3 nations it was split into now. Yet the no-shy trees rarely thrived in the south, so the tradition became the offering of a charm of protection carved from the trees. In the centuries since, it had been forgotten, until the tribe fled Mire after the Great War and adapted the tradition, making carvings of their own. Most created charms in the likeness of the animals they were akin to, and hung them from the trees around their tents. The charms were a small magic, prayers and wishes to their goddess Kaimarani, bolstered by a simple offering of power. The hundreds upon hundreds around the camp created a strong ward that set off a wave of foreboding for anyone who might venture here. "Sister Isai?" Kissin, one of the smallest and thus most outspoken of the group, called. Lamplight caught the gold rings adorning the tips of his pronged horns, and huge sand fox ears dominated either side of his face. His coppery skin and fur were the exact same hue, and though the spray of white freckles across his face reminded Isai of a fawn, the boy's expression was distinctly tricksome, all wide-eyed innocence at odds with his toothy grin. "What will you carve for us today?" Isai had been planning on a cunning leopard. The children, having never ventured far enough south to see the great cats of the Aran Plain and the deadened jungle, were fascinated with the large predators. Yet Kissin, she knew, would request a fox, like he had the last few lessons. "I haven't yet decided. Perhaps Tosin can help us," Isai murmured, offering a smile to the fox boy's twin sister. Unlike her brother, Tosin never spoke unless prompted. Her big, glossy black eyes were always slightly out of focus, lost in a dreamland. Isai hoped that meant her imagination would be a bit more well-developed than her brother's. The girl blinked a few times, fox ears twitching, before she explained. "Mother Moriah told us about the Krakai in the desert." Isai's heart sank. She had learned the stories of the Krakai that crawled up from the sea into the desert, but she had no sense of what the creatures truly looked like, having never been more than 15 miles beyond the Myrian border, let alone thousands of leagues south to the Cremere Sands. "I think I would require a larger canvas to carve a Krakai, Tosin. Maybe another time." Then she pitched her voice low. But I do know another story, and it's Mother Mariah's favorite. Has she ever told you about the leopard who was so clever it trapped a snake and tied its tail into a knot? The children giggled and inched forward until they were practically atop Isai's boots, tugging on her skirt. Mother Mariah was the leader of the tribe, but Isai rarely used the honorific, as Mariah was actually her mother.